Hey everybody, got a lot I want to talk about. I don't know if I can get it out right. I'll give it my best shot. The A friend of mine texted me over my Charlie Kirk video and said some things that were interesting, and I'm not sure exactly how to respond to it. But I'm going to just give it my best shot. I'll start somewhere. I guess I'm trying to build a model of reality in my mind. I've talked about this in a lot of my past YouTube videos, and I don't know how much to go over things again. Sometimes I just want to go over things I said in the past just to remind myself of it. I guess that goes without saying. Yeah, I believe that there's an all-loving God there. I don't know, but I hold it as a postulate that there's one. But I don't think God has ever communicated to us, because if you look at our reality from God's perspective, he has made a universe where he doesn't know what's going to happen in it. And we see this idea, in mathematical systems, chaotic mathematical systems, where you set up the initial condition and you let it flower out, and you have no idea what's going to happen in it. And it's mathematically provable that you don't know what's going to happen in it. At least that's my understanding. I get this idea from John Conway's The Game of Life, 1970. I get this idea from Stephen Wolfram's physics project. Look at his 2023 TED Talk video. So, attaching to all that, I believe that there's an all-loving God there, but he cannot answer a prayer. He cannot communicate to anybody in this world, because if he were to do so, then we would become a different reality. So, if God's all-powerful and all-loving and all-knowing, he can make every universe where he doesn't know what's going to happen in it, because he's all-powerful, so he can make such a universe. If he already knows what's going to happen, and I'm sure he can make every universe where he already knows what's going to happen in those, he can make those too. He's all powerful, right? So but he can also make universes where he doesn't know what's going to happen in, because it's not knowable until the system plays itself out. I guess ultimately, I believe axiomatically that we have free will, though there's a lot of people who challenge that. I like Lex Friedman's viewpoint on free will, which goes something like this. I see free will as being observationally true, so therefore it's true. I feel like I have free will when I do this. Sam Harris argues that free will is an illusion. I never really got with Sam Harris on that. I tried, but I just disagree with him. And I'm not going to go into some kind of ritualistic meditation with him, so I'm not doing that. So I believe that God is there, and that's important. I don't think God ever communicated this, so I don't believe in the Ten Commandments. I do not believe in Jesus. I don't believe in any of that stuff. However, our old religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, do provide a tremendous amount of evidence and a tremendous amount of beauty, a tremendous amount of things that we can lean on for understanding in some ways. So my own particular religious opinions are that I am a renovationist. My philosophy is I'm a renovationist. My religious denomination, I have my own. I'm a renovationist Christian. I think the word renovationist Christian, if you Google it in Wikipedia, was used by communists long ago, and I have my own version. I wear a religious symbol. It's a hammer. And what I seek to do is to figure out the best underlying principles of Roman Catholicism, Christianity, and rest them on more secure foundations than the foundation of Jesus. I do believe Jesus actually existed. I've talked about this many times. I do believe that Jesus existed. I believe that he was very likely a very good person. I bet anything he thought God was communicating with him. But I just hold axiomatically that God was not communicating with him. And the poor guy, was up against a lot of problems. He's the actual king of his people. He's but his people are occupied by a foreign power. And everyone's looking to him, I suppose, at that time for guidance. What do we do? Do we fight these guys? Do we collaborate with these guys? You can't collaborate with occupiers. No, you don't do that. And you can't fight them if they're that powerful. It's just like, go ahead and be a slave. Actually imagine. I challenge particularly any right-wing white guy. really just try to imagine being a black man in South Carolina in 1840. Just try to imagine it. You're owned by this plantation over here. You're 25 years old. It sucks, to be a slave. There's no question about it. So, and when you're occupied by foreign powers that have no business occupying you, it hurts. And, they could have business occupying because, again, the Romans are doing what Romans do, and maybe they feel like they're justified in conquering all the land around it, because if they don't conquer it, somebody else will conquer them. So we got to conquer you. And this is arguments that I've made for why America has a just foundation. It's a conversation to have. I don't think we live on stolen land. I think, the English were looking at that Spanish Armada in 1588, and they saw, the life pass before their eyes, and they better get busy, doing the same thing that the Spanish were doing, conquest of the New World, so that they could build up their empire, so that they could defend themselves from all the power and the resources that the Spanish were getting from what they were doing down south. The Romans, I suppose, maybe had the same problem. I don't know. But here's this young man, in 33 AD, looking at his Roman occupation. He rides into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, and he says, "Hey, I'm here. I'm the actual king." And he preaches to his people about what matters. And the more I look at it, the more I think, again, I don't think God communicated to us ever, not once. People are just saying that he has, and they think that he has, because, that crow flew by at the precise moment that you were about to do the attack, or about to, that fire broke out at the precise moment that, the people were, and so you believe that God has led you, but, no miracles ever happened. Nobody ever walked on water, but really amazing chance coincidences have happened. And people can think that God has spoken in those chance coincidences, but statistically unlikely events have to happen to some of us all the time. And you think it's the hand of God that's leading the statistically unlikely event, but every now and then people are going to experience things that are statistically unlikely. It's the spirituality of mathematics, right? The spirituality of mathematics would suggest that every now and then somebody has to experience something that's really unusual, and they think it comes from God, and then they communicate it to others, and others are like, if only I wasn't such a sinner, these great things would happen to me, and it spreads. But it's just not the way the world works at all. Doesn't mean there isn't a heaven, doesn't mean there isn't a God, and I'm not saying that there isn't one, but why can't our world be so complex that when we came into existence, 300,000 years ago, after a 13 billion year process of the universe coming into existence and reaching the state where the planet Earth had sufficient stability to produce beings that have self-awareness on it, that God's looking at these guys, us, like, wow, look at what's happening over here. And then we start telling each other, God spoke to me and God said that you can't lie, you can't steal, you can't kill, you don't eat ham. It's like, and God's looking at you saying that, and it's like, I'm not going to stop. You got free will. You do whatever you want. You shouldn't lie, I guess, but and so that's like that's how I perceive God. That's what I see there, and that I'm a left winger. I'm politically left. I've been politically left for a long time. My politics has not even slightly generated my opinion about God. For 50 years of my life, even when I became a Christian when I was very young, turned my life and will over to the power of God as I understood him. And, I gave my life over to Jesus when I was like 17 years old. Even when I did it, I knew that there was something untrue about it. There was something like, this resurrection thing. Okay, yeah, maybe. But seems like there's a lot of people that deserve to be resurrected throughout history. Why just this one guy? You know what I mean? I just always felt something was phony about it. And then I would experience and have conversations with other religious people, and they would dance around and refuse to talk about certain concepts, and they just wouldn't get into the nitty-gritty about stuff. And so, the years went by, and I remember just the shocking realization that came to me that God could still be there, and I hold that he is, it just has never answered a prayer. He's never communicated to anyone. The Bible is wholly false. So is the Quran. The Torah, false. None of it's true. But that doesn't mean that it isn't wise counsel not to lie. It isn't, say the Lord's Prayer. It's almost like, 5 really brilliant people sat around a campfire. What would be the one prayer that the most perfect guy would ever teach people to pray? And it would be, pray to God, our Father. Fathers tend to be very loving, but also tend to be hands off. They let you learn by experience, Our Father who's in heaven, because in some way he's not here. Hallowed be thy name. What thing could be greater than the God who made everything? It makes sense, right? It's just, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, because we know the kingdom isn't here because Pilate's in charge. Donald Trump's in charge. These are not, godly figures, as it were. I call attention to the fact that when Trump swore in his second term, he did not put his hand on the Bible. It matters. These are, we could go through the Lord's Prayer, and it makes all the sense in the world. But there are obviously problems with it. You know what I mean? You forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It's like, in some translations, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are in debt to us. Like, that's going to happen. When somebody owes you money, you want to get paid, right? And it's like, hey, man, they're like, why did they get to spend the value that belonged to me? They have to pay me back, and it's like, forgive us our debts, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. I suppose it's true. I love the idea of it for sure. I remember the deliver us from evil part. That is to deliver us from Satan himself. I just don't think Satan's there. I did think Satan was there for a while, and I had very clear logic to the idea of Satan. Satan's a spiritual force that hovers over there somewhere, and that force can plant ideas in your mind and ideas in my mind, and choreograph bad things to happen. For example, I can think about torturing my enemies and torturing somebody, and it's like, that must be something that's of Satan, but it isn't. My willingness and my ability to think about torturing somebody to death is an obvious mechanism that has protected, my evolutionary line for thousands and thousands of years, because my tribe has food, your tribe doesn't. You, just like me, how vicious I will be to you if you come try to take our food and fail at doing so. Oh my God, the humiliation, tortures that we will put through. They are systemic through all human cultures. No exceptions. From Japan to the Comanche Indians, to the Tower of London, to Andersonville, to the French Revolution. It's like our willingness to be cruel to our enemies is epic. What Brad Pitt in the movie Fury. It's like, our willingness to be cruel to our enemies is obvious about us. But that kind of like creates a nuclear weapon. We have this nuclear weapon in our minds, and therefore the reason why we have it is because it made us more likely to survive, because people who don't have these nuclear weapons in their mind, they wouldn't have been able to reproduce, and their genetic lines would have been cut out, And so that's, one of the most beautiful things I think about being a Renovationist Christian. Understand something. I do not believe in the resurrection. I'm a Christian. A lot of people say, you can't be Christian without believing in the resurrection. I'm saying, what are you telling me what it means to be a Christian? I'll tell you what it means to be a Christian. You follow me? You cannot take the title Christian away from me. A Christian is somebody who's supposed to seek out truth wherever he finds it, and to be charitable and to do good things, and etc. So I'm a Christian. I embrace the title. My mom was Roman Catholic, and I was baptized in St. Margaret's Church over there, and I am a Christian. And somebody who tells me you have to believe in the resurrection of Jesus to believe in Christianity, I reject that categorically, because the resurrection of Jesus violates the second law of thermodynamics. It's just not how this world works. And you guys say, well, in this one instance, well, God could do it. Well, God, yeah, of course God could do it. There could absolutely exist a world where somebody has been resurrected. Do you follow me? That could absolutely exist. That God has created an emergent world, and one time he reaches and touches the world and changes it in some fundamental way. One time, you know what I mean? That world can exist. It does exist. I hold axiomatically that we don't live in this world because I think the ideas that we see, the miracles that we see in the Bible are far more likely just storytelling, falsehoods, lies, misunderstandings. We obviously live in a world where people could, for 1,000 generations of people, for 1,000 years, could believe in something's false, and God's going to let you do it. We know that. Because look, we Christians have been around and Muslims are looking at us saying, your Bible's corrupt. It's been corrupt since 325 AD at the Council of Constantinople or whatever, that Nicaea, whatever it was. And Muslims are going to tell you that. So your Bible's been corrupt and you Christians have been believing in something false for 1,700 years. Well, Allah apparently lets Christians do that, doesn't he? It's like, and we could say the same thing to them. I just think they're all false. It's the most likely and obvious truth, isn't it? And this is important. The fact that the Big Bang is true, to the extent that it is, because you can look at the evidence, and the evidence is very strong. We've dug down and found the old fossil bones, and the evidence for that is overwhelming. We know that there is no original sin. There was no Garden of Eden. We know what the history actually was of our species. We can dig down, we can see, and we can hypothesize and use our imaginations and see what our history was. We understand what we are. Okay? And 500, 1,000 years ago, that evidence was not available to Christians. Not saying bishops and Christians and whatever they were 1,000 years ago were bad people. They were doing the best they could with what they knew. God, there was disease. We probably are sinning. There's hurricanes. There's volcanoes. We're probably sinning. If we just would stop sinning so much, And in a way, I mean, so as a renovationist Christian, I'm trying to find some way to fix these ideas so that they rest on certain foundation. Rather than original sin, we could redefine the idea of original sin as being our need to embrace the best parts of what we are from our evolutionary process and to figure out some way to manage the worst parts, to distance ourselves from the worst parts. I've said this one many times. It's like we want to learn how to dance around the campfire and sing songs and love one another. You know what I mean? The courtship rituals that we go through in order to find a mate and to get married, these things are the best part of what we are. What's the worst part of what we are? We know what that is, and we can look at it and see it clearly. And so those things we need to manage. It's fundamental to me that everyone in this whole world matters just as much as everyone else. But if you really believe that and you really truly act on it, you'll be taken advantage of. The next thing you know, you have to group up and take care of yourself because you'll get screwed over. And that's the fundamental problem with this world. And God made this world. I don't know if he knew it was going to be like that for our species. He triggered a world using underlying rules, like atoms of space. That watch the Cellular Atomic, look at John Conway's Game of Life, look at the TED Talk videos by Stephen Wolfram. I mean, the idea that he started a universe with very simple initial conditions and let it flower forward, and he's watching to see what happens in it. And he did it for millions, billions, infinitely uncountable number of emergent worlds, where every possible world where he can't know what happens in those worlds until those worlds play themselves out. And he's watching what happens in all of them. Because an all-powerful God can do that and kind of would do that. And some worlds where people, self-aware beings come into existence in this world and they suffer so horribly, he would just turn that world off. And we're in this ambiguous one where it's like he's looking at it trying to do I let this one go because we have so much beauty and so many good things going on and so much hope and for the future, but scary things like we could create AI gods that would torture us for a trillion years, like in The Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons, Hyperperon, Fall of Hyperperon, Endymion, Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons, or this world which has this mother over here who's taking care of her children. There's a lot of love in the family and everyone's happy and there's good things happening. 100 miles over there, there's genocide occurring. You know what I mean? And it's like where some mother is not capable of taking care of their children because of war bombs dropping all over the place. Look at what's happening in the Ukraine. Look at Gaza. God's looking at this world perplexed as all could be. So that's where, right-wingers want, a lot of right-wingers, the higher, I imagine there's many upper-class right-wingers that are just, bullshit artists. They'll just say whatever they need to say to get power. And then younger right-wingers are trying to find simple principles that they can act on so that they know how to be about things. I think of a young friend of mine who's against abortion in all cases. And it's like, I think it's super obvious to me that there might be a God there, an all-loving God, and God's looking at the world and seeing all the abortions that have or have ever happened or can imagine the ones that will happen. And I think that God looks at some of them and is glad that they occurred, and is looking at other ones and wishing they hadn't. And other ones, maybe he's just not even sure what he feels about that one. That's my understanding of God. And that's how I look at God. And it's like people want certainty about something where I don't even think that an all-powerful creator would have certainty about that. And you guys are, that's how I call it. Makes all the sense in the world to me. When you look at reality from God's perspective, you would, I think, come to this as the most logical conclusion about the nature of reality that you can. You gotta land on the axioms that you land on, and you go with them. I was thinking about Islam. I was reading some of those Charlie Kirk tweets, and he was against Islamic immigration. I don't know what again, I'm not doing the research. I can't do the research. It's too hard to do the research. But he did seem to be against Muslims coming into America. And, I let my mind really, truly try to roam about that. And I think mathematics, the spirituality of being good at math and knowing a lot about math, I think helps me with this. And it's sort of like anybody in the world would recognize. Say there was not a single Muslim living in America, and there was, a war-torn country over there, and one Muslim wants to immigrate to America so that they could be safe. And we're like, would you let them? And of course everyone would say, of course we would let them. Of course, yes, you would. But how about if, a war-torn region over there and there's 25 million Muslims that want to come to America, will we let them? And it's like, probably not. I would, but I know that I wouldn't have a sufficient power to make that happen because the Congress would probably bar a lot of them from coming over. And this is an interesting point, because what if England was war-torn? What if England had a major nuclear catastrophe and 25 million people from England suddenly asked to come to America? Well, they would assimilate into our country much more easily. Now, what do I mean? The Muslims would, and that's obviously true. Because the English people come in already speak the language. They would be able to integrate right into our churches. The English people are Catholic and Protestant, and there would be all kinds of churches they could easily just suddenly attend. With 25 million Muslims over here, they wouldn't attend our churches, I don't think. They would have to build mosques for themselves, and they would have to, and that, they don't speak the language. They have to learn the language, and it's that their assimilation into our country would be more difficult. And so that does change the numbers. And so who gets to decide, how many, citizens of people from Pakistan get to this year become American citizens? I think there's a number. And I know there's a number. I'm positive. And it's like Congress gets to decide that number. You know what I mean? And there it is. And that's the number that gets decided. And so I remember I'm just so heartbroken over that little Syrian boy with the sneaker. If you guys looked that one up, that's about from 10 years ago or whatever it was. But Syria was war torn, and they, we wanted to bring in a bunch of Syrian immigrants into America, and they just wouldn't let them. Congress was like, no, or whatever it was, Trump or Obama wanted to do it, but Congress wouldn't let Obama. I can't even remember the details. I remember being really heartbroken over that. I was heartsick over that. We should have, when Syria was going through all those problems, we should have brought in, 100,000, tens of, 100,000, even more Syrian refugees into our country and give them the protection that they needed. We obviously should have done that, but we didn't. And it broke my heart at the time. I remember that clearly. That doesn't mean that I also simultaneously realize that with a non-Christian, America is obviously more Christian than it is Muslim. It's obviously more Christian than it is Buddhist. That's obviously true. You know what I mean? And so it's easier to bring in people from Christian nations than it is from other nations, and it's easier to bring in English-speaking people than people who are not English-speaking. This kind of goes without saying. And then it's up to our elected representatives to decide the numbers and the amount and all that. I mean, I'll look at Charlie Kirk videos or David Wood videos, and these guys will go on and on and on about the secret conspiracy between leftists and Muslims seeking to destroy America. And they go, it's obvious crap. It's obviously false. When you have a nation of 340 million people, how many serial killers are out there? There's more than one. How many people out there are up to no good whatsoever? There's a few. How many Chinese people are here spying, willing to give whatever information they could to the Chinese government? How many Muslims are here who are, reading the Quran and taking it literally, and their literal interpretation of the Quran, their interpretation would be that they are willing to kill the heathens for in the name of Allah, in jihad. There's got to be some. Look at David Koresh. You know what I mean? He was a Christian that used Christianity to do all kinds of evil stuff. And when you have a world as big as ours, 8 billion people, you got to have all kinds of people believing all kinds of things. But, again, I'm sympathetic with the idea that the amount of immigration that we should take from, an English-speaking country that has a Christian background versus a Muslim country where they don't have an English background, it should be obviously a different number. It just kind of goes without saying. And it's up to Congress and the immigration authorities to figure out what that number is. How many you can accept every year, how many new citizens you can make from that culture every year. You obviously want to make some. I think it's a great thing that we have lots of immigration to America. At least we did before this fool Donald Trump became our president, But, he was really, really, really good at making you think something that was false, making you believe something that was false. He was very good at it. You know what I mean? There's people coming from shithole countries. And we're going to ban all Muslims from coming to America until we know what's going on. And it's these kinds of things that he did, in his first round were just horrific. Just horrific. Truth is truth. Truth is truth. You would obviously allow one Muslim immigrant. You obviously wouldn't allow 100 million. Where's your cutoff number in the middle there? The truth is truth. How many... We could go with this analysis all day long, but that's the framework of the truth of the question. Then you just need access to the data and logical thinking about it and sociological understanding, and you go, from there. And your elected leaders have to make choices about what they want for the country. And it's like, you can't make me think that any of the elected leaders we had in the president, other than Trump, because he's so bizarre, that they didn't want what was best for America. It was obviously true. They had appropriate limitations for everything they were thinking, but Trump came along with this drumbeat of lies and said something different, and said it again and again and again. And who can do the research? We don't know, so he might be right. So, you know what I mean? And he tapped into that part of us, that worst part of our angels of our nature. He tapped into that part of us. Is like, yeah, they're other than us. Yeah, let's beat them. And it's like, he tapped into that negative, that bad side of our human nature, that side that we need to manage. So it gets me back to what I think about, renovationist Christianity, the belief system that I have. It's like belief in original sin and the need to believe in Jesus in order to be redeemed from it and get baptized as your confirmation of your willingness to wash your sins away and become good is an approximation for what we need to do. The truth is, what we need to do is we need to recognize as best we can by the study of psychology, history, thinking about it, brain studies, and the process of evolution itself, and looking at how primates behave and all that, come to a deep understanding of what we actually are. And then make clear decisions in our mind, what parts of that, what we actually are, should we amplify, and what parts we try to suppress. That is approximately the same thing as believing in that we need to be redeemed from original sin. That's why I suppose I could still go to church and say the words. I haven't for a long time, but I suppose I could still. That's what my goal would be if I didn't need money and I didn't need to work and I didn't need to take care of my family. My goal would be to write that new liturgy. You know what the Catholic liturgy is. It's a 3-year cycle of readings, and it's like, instead of rereading again and again and again that Jesus cursed the fig tree, and that Jesus walked on water, and that Jesus healed this sick guy, and it's like, instead of rereading this bullshit for a 3-year cycle, as beautiful as it is, planting ideas in our hearts and our minds that reap some benefit. The only reason why I wasn't able to heal that blind person over there is because I'm too much of a sinner. I got to act even better and more better. You're never going to heal that blind guy over there, You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's just never going to happen, no matter how good you try to be. And so it's like that's what I'm trying to say. I really believe that, I remember praying the rosary and remember it being good for me for a very short time. Then it no longer was good for me. And I started praying my rosary my own way. I would pray thinking about my own mother, or my own wife, or my own, I would pray the rosary and think about concrete things that I needed to think about. How could I be better in my relationship with my son? You know what I mean? Or my sons, instead of, the only way that the rosary is valid is if you meditate upon these mysteries. It's like, that's such bullshit. And sometimes I secretly wonder, I know this is a hard thing to say, but it's like, one reason why, some right-wing guy, and he made a point that you have to contend with. It was that Murray guy, the gay guy from England, that Douglas Murray. He made this point about Islam, about how, the Islamic nations are experiencing cognitive dissonance because if they were truly practicing the one true religion given to them by the final prophet of God, then why aren't their nations doing any better? Why is Israel so much more powerful than them? Why is a Christian nation like America so much more powerful than they are? And I sometimes secretly wonder it's because they have to pray 5 times a day, because prayer is useless. It doesn't do you any good. You just think it does. It's hard to say that to you, but I just think that's true. I mean, a person does need to absorb beauty into their hearts and minds. And, I remember once upon a time wanting to go to Mass daily, because you go into the church and you see these beautiful images and you smell maybe the incense, and the ritual itself is so beautiful, I just wish it wasn't connected with so many things that in my heart, I just know aren't true. I could still want to be a good person. So it's like, if I were to preach, and I should, go out on street corners with pamphlets and pass them out, and I've written pamphlets before. I've wrote a video about it. But if I were to go out and preach, what are the things that I would try to preach about? I would be like, you need to believe in an all-loving God. And you should realize that that all-loving God is unfortunately stuck in not being able to communicate with us and not being able to help us. And that we became self-aware. You became self-aware when you were 4 years old or whatever it was. And our species became self-aware, and we have to have some confidence that God's going to take care of us in the future. And we need to constantly thread this needle about caring about everyone else while we simultaneously care about ourselves and care about, those who are very close to us, our family and our neighborhood, and find some way to balance that so that we can avoid war and create peace. And it's like, and the hardest thing to talk about would be like what's on the American Liberty Bell, Leviticus 25:10. The idea that communist revolution is absolutely necessary, but only for a short time. It's a cycle. That's why I think Moses saw it so clearly. He said it was from God, but I don't think it was from God. But I think, I don't know, but I think Moses saw it so clearly. This idea of every 50 years you have to have a great jubilee. Every 7 years people should rest. Every 50 years you have a great jubilee, and you free everybody from their debts. You free everybody from prison, and you let everything start over again. And then 10 years after the Jubilee, there's going to be rich people and there's going to be poor people, and that's just the way it is. You know what I mean? And rich people are going to be rich, and you got to let them be rich. And poor people are going to be poor, and you got to let them be poor. Until finally you get, things get so out of whack, and so much wealth and so much power is in the hands of so few, and then you have to take it from them. But it should be programmed into the system to do that. It should be something we have to fight for in a bloody revolution every so often. Everyone owed the King of France, so they cut his head off, and now nobody owes the King of France anything. It's what starts to happen if there's 40 oligarchs that own all the wealth in America. At some point, the people are going to rise up and cut their heads off. What's better is they just give their money away. What's better is they recognize that every so often you have to have a jubilee, and you have to relinquish all that power and control back to the people. And then after the jubilee's over, the jubilees last 1 year. And once the jubilee's over, you go back to the system again. And so it's a cycle. It's an up and down kind of thing. Leviticus 25:10, declare freedom and liberty to all the inhabitants of the world. Those old Jews had it right. They understood it. Because St. Paul said it best, the love of money is the root of all evil. Some people are so good at hoarding money, they have all of it, and the people who have none of it are going to be in slavery to those who have it. And eventually there's going to be a lot of slaves all over the place, in slavery to the people who have all the money, and you're going to rise up and you're going to cut their heads off, and you know what I mean? And it's going to be bloody, but the rich people might fight back and win, and then it's oppression and tyranny, and it's like, wouldn't it be better if everyone just loved one another and recognized that you have to have a periodic jubilee? I'm in my mind, I think a best time for the next jubilee, why don't we honor Jesus? Have a jubilee in 2033, because isn't that what he was doing? Isn't that what he was doing in 33 AD? When he went into Jerusalem and he was telling everybody, you're not following these old Jewish laws right. You're not honoring Leviticus 25. He turned over the money chambers tables because maybe that year you couldn't do these kinds of things. You were supposed to not buy and sell. You were supposed to have a year of rest where you kind of redistribute things, and you let prisoners free, and debts, you let them go, and you start things over again. And maybe that's what he was trying to do. I really do think it. I believe it so deeply. It's the reason why, even though I know that he never walked on water and I know he wasn't resurrected, I will not give up the title Christian. I love you all. Be good.